Marjorie. Today, we will be talking about crisis and risk management concepts and principles. So basically, here is the objectives of this chapter. First is define risk. Second is to identify and know the sources of risk. Determine natural disasters and management risk in tourism industry. Identify common accidents in tourism industry. And lastly, to know strategies to manage threats. So I think the best way to start this discussion is to define what is risk. So what is really risk? So risk is defined as something foreseeable in any kind of business, even in tourism and hospitality world. And also, according to United Nations World Tourism Organization, risk is a situation that exposes someone or something into harm, loss, or danger. So according to them, risk can also be a physical matter. It could be a property loss, it could be a business financial risk, and a lot more. So what does it really mean? So it means that from the moment that a person engages into business in tourism and hospitality industry, whether it is sole proprietorship or partnership or any type of businesses, basically risk immediately attaches. So for example, an example for number one is food handling is one of the issues that must be adequately addressed whenever someone prepares a food, because the danger of food poisoning due to food contamination is very high in handling a food prepares for the customer. So basically, as a food handler, we must be responsible and we must take necessary precautions, standard precautions in order to avoid that danger. And as a food handler also, we must also follow the government's regulations to avoid the danger as well. And as a food handler, it is mandatory for us to have the food sanitary permit as we are part of the food industry. And for the second example, the tourism and hospitality industry practices getting information about their guests and clientele for their security purposes, not only for the part of guests, but also to the part of the management as well. However, getting and obtaining information from the guest is considered risky. So as part of the tourism and hospitality industry, we must safeguard accordingly the confidential information of our guests. So here is another definition of risk according to Business Dictionary, as they define risk as the probability of threat of damage, injuries, liabilities, or any other adverse occurrence caused by external and internal vulnerabilities, and that may be avoided through preemptive actions. So we must take note that if we are engaging businesses like tourism and hospitality businesses, we must take into consideration that there is still a probability of threats and damages, because there are still occurrences and events that is beyond the man's control or beyond our control. So let's take for example the event industry. So for example, the weather by the time you have an agreement with your client is completely different by the time of the actual event you have set. So basically, those actual occurrences must have a preemptive action. So as an event organizer, we must have an action plan, a contingency plans for emergency and backup purposes. So, in the point of view of economics, risk implies future uncertainties about deviation from expected earnings and expected income. So basically, people engage into businesses to gain something or to gain something from the specific capital they invest into a specific business. However, realizing the gain or the benefit from investing something is somewhat not easy, because the risk and the hazard is still present and still attached to it. Now, we will define risk and hazards, because there are some instances that risk and hazards are used interchangeably, because a lot of people think they were the same. But the Canadian Center for Occupational Health and Safety gave a concrete definition of both risk and hazard to distinguish the two. So if we're going to read the definition, the hazard only means it pertains to any potential damages, while risk is the chance or the probability that can cause harm if a person is exposed to a hazard. So here we have the 8 sources of risk. First is the uncertainty of financial market. Second is the threats from project failures. Third is the legal liabilities. And fourth is the credit risk. Fifth is accidents. Sixth is the natural causes and disasters. Seventh is the deliberate from an advisory. And lastly, eighth is the event of uncertain or unpredictable root cause.
Hi, I'm Therese and we will talk about the uncertainty in the financial markets, threats from project failures, legal liabilities in tourism and hospitality industry, and also the credit risk. So without further ado, let's start with the uncertainty in the financial markets. When we say uncertainty, it can be described as the chance of occurrence of some event where the probability is not known. This means that uncertainty relates to the occurrence of an event about which little is known, except the fact that it may occur. As one consideration that a manager should take into in the conduct of his or her business is the uncertainty in the financial markets. Managers must be vigilant enough in determining those uncertainties that could give more impact in the entirety of the business. The press briefing statement of former U.S. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld was quoted, "We know there are known unknowns." That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. However, there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we do not know, we do not know. When we say known unknowns, these are the risks whose occurrence is predictable or foreseeable. Either their probability of occurrence or their likely effect is known. When, on the other hand, when we say unknown unknowns, these are the events whose probabilities of occurrence and effect are not foreseeable by even the most experienced people. As the statement of Rumsfeld is a reminder to everyone that the awareness on the distinction between certainty and uncertainty could be helpful in many circumstances, like the reduction of so much confidence for investors and the protection of wealth for an extended period. The paper of Nick Bloom, which is also an economist, he argued that uncertainty can hit different groups in different ways, as he gave oil price spike as an example, contending that it may give a good impact for the producers of oil, but not for airlines. As pointed out by Bloom, the OPEC or OPEC oil embargo in 1973 had tipped the U.S. into recession by tripling oil prices and increasing uncertainty over future oil prices. In the paper also of Slovic, he said that although the efficient market prices already enunciated the known factors, the primary sources of market sources are considered as unknown factors, as according to him, that unknown factors should be referred as market uncertainty. He finally concluded that from the perspective of market stability, the most critical aspect is not the marketplace, but it is the degree of market uncertainty embedded in different assets or business models. The tax reform for acceleration and inclusion, are also known as Train Law or RA 10963, which took effect on January 1, 2018, overhauled the National Internal Revenue Code NIRC, which was adopted 20 years ago. Although the train may be considered as beneficial to some extent as it decreases the tax on personal income, estate, and donation, it could somehow also produce uncertainty to the financial market as it increases the tax on certain passive incomes, documents, as well as excise tax on petroleum products, minerals, automobiles, and cigarettes. The primary commodities for food and hospitality industry were likewise affected by train law when it imposes excise taxes on sweetened beverages and non-essential services and removes tax exemption of lotto and other PCSO winnings amounting to more than 10,000 pesos. Let's talk about the threats from project failures. It is another source of risk that could hamper the success of the tourism and hospitality business is the threat usually embedded in the projects. If you are an aspirant manager, you cannot just avoid the threat. You have to deal with it. Failures, the success of public-private partnership is being measured by avoiding the project failure or minimizing their consequences. It means that the PPP or public-private partnership is the right project. It is the right delivery model for the project. The project is appraised, structured, and managed to lessen the negative impacts on cost, scope, time, and quality. As based on Tyler Jr., the compelling business development requires taking on calculated risk. Throughout the whole process of project development, the managers could direct their teams on the right actions utilizing establishing the distinction between risk and effects. Consequently, late projects and its failure to meet the quality guidelines could produce an adverse impressions on the new members. Let's talk about the legal liabilities in tourism and hospitality industry. As discussed, the risk may be defined as a potential loss or harm to persons and property. When applied to tourism and hospitality industry, it could be any of the following: the financial loss, damage to property, or injury to workers or guests. It is a given fact that most people in the hospitality and tourism industry would like to get rid of any legal responsibility attaching to the risk. The reason why they have been using risk management as a precaution measure. To emphasize risk management is a tool to avoid injury to guests and employees and to protect their business operations from financial and physical inconveniences. Risk management in tourism and hospitality industry is a two-way process. First is safety of the guests and employees, which includes the avoidance of emotional and physical harm. Is the moral and ethical responsibility of the operators. Second is the protection to business operations, which includes protection against damage to property, persons and property, and future litigations. Risk management is like hitting two birds with one stone. Safety of the guests and employees plus the avoidance of suits and other causes of actions. Now, let's talk about the credit risk. Credit risk is another source of risk that could impact the tourism and hospitality industries. As credit risk, defined in principles for management of credit risk, that the potential that the bank, borrower, or counterparty will fail to meet its obligations following agreed terms. The goal of credit risk management is to maximize a bank's risk-adjusted rate of return by maintaining credit risk exposure within acceptable parameters. Banks need to manage the credit risk inherent in the entire portfolio as well as the risk in individual credits or transactions. Banks should also consider the relationships between credit risk and other risk. The effective management of credit risk is a critical component of a comprehensive approach to risk management and essential to the long-term success of any banking organization.
Good day. My name is Mary Chris, and I will be discussing about the accidents and common injuries in the hospitality industry. Risk and accidents are sometimes being used interchangeably, but they are different. Accidents are reactive, while risks are preventive. Accident management can help save the manager's time, and it also helps reduce the administration cost. Here are the common injuries in the hospitality industry. First is slip and fall injuries. The second on the list is musculoskeletal injuries. The next one is skin reaction. The fourth is respiratory illness. Fifth is the security-related accidents. Sixth is the food poisoning. And lastly is the elevator and escalator accidents. Slip and fall injuries. Hotel workers at risk of falling and slipping because of the nature of their work, which requires them to move quickly and faster. In order for the hotel, resort, or establishment liable for the injury of the guest must prove the management's negligence or unreasonable carelessness. Musculoskeletal injuries, or MSD, are injuries or disorders of the muscle, nerves, tendons, joints, cartilage, and spinal disc. Working in a hotel requires a lot of strength and agility because of the requirement of their work to bend and lift that could cause muscular pains and injury. The severity of the injuries would usually depend on the factors that trigger the injury and the early medical attention. The skin reaction may be caused by the exposure of the hotel workers to a variety of chemicals on a daily basis, like strong cleaning agents. Respiratory illness. There is a possibility that hotel employees usually assigned to the housekeeping department could acquire respiratory illness due to their exposure to infectious disease carried through bodily fluids like vomits, feces, and bloods. Security-related accidents. No matter how careful the management of a hotel and a similar establishment is, there were still some reports of accidents that could be attributed to accident and negligence cases like robbery and theft. In this section, the authors have opted to include the provisions of the Revised Penal Code of the Philippines, specifically Article 102. In this article, it would help students to determine the corresponding liability of their actions if they would engage themselves in the hotel and similar establishment in the future. Under the law, the innkeepers, tavern keepers, and the proprietors of establishment are liable for the presence of the following elements. The innkeepers, tavern keepers, proprietor of establishment, or his employees violated a municipal ordinance or some general or police regulation, a crime committed in such inn, tavern, or establishment. And lastly, the person criminally liable is insolvent. Food poisoning is typically being experienced in the restaurants and similar establishments, even in luxury hotels and resorts. It is usually caused by undercooked food, cross-contamination in the kitchen, or other negligent preparation measures. The most common symptoms of food poisoning include nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. Elevator and escalator accidents. Elevator and escalator, which are common in hotels, malls, and other similar establishments, are very beneficial to both guests and management, as it could give them convenience in getting from one level to another. The management, however, of the said establishment must exercise due diligence to make sure it is well maintained and that any safety of the guest is of paramount consideration.
Hi, I'm Raven. Today, we will be talking about the accidents in the tourism industry. Accidents occur when there is an unintentional external action at a particular time and place, with a non-apparent and deliberate cause, but with marked effects. It is an adverse outcome which could have been prevented if the attendant circumstances could have been recognized and attended with before its happening. There are many tourism-related activities which are susceptible to harm and damage to people and property. Now let's move forward to number 1. The first one is the accidents due to fortuitous events or acts of God. Accidents in connection with this category are beyond the contemplations of man. The causes are not within the bounds of man. Who would ever forget the horrible Indian Ocean earthquake and tsunami who killed almost 250 people, including the tourists in Phuket, Thailand, and 13 other countries? So because we are talking about earthquake, let me give you some of the national phenomena identified around the world. Let's start up the first one, earthquake. The second one, volcanic eruptions. The third one, flood. Fourth one, landslides. Fifth one, erosions. Sixth one, fire. Seventh one, storm. And eighth one, typhoon. Now let's move forward to the second one, transportation's accidents. Operators in the tourism industry usually create packages with the following different modes of transportation to accommodate tourists. First one, air, such as for example airplanes; water, for example ships; land, for example buses. The said modes of transportation are not free to danger of meeting and accidents, no matter how diligent the operators are, because of the different perils attaching to it. Who would ever forget the MV Our Lady of Mount Carmel sank in Masbate, Philippines last June 2013 and cost the lives of 2 of the 57 documented passengers on the ship. Another is at least 91 people died on June 16, 2013 when the ferry St. Thomas Aquinas collided with cargo MV Sulpicio Express 7 while both vessels were traversing the Sea of Talisay in the province of Cebu. Several more bodies were recovered, which gave rise to at least 160 dead. Another also is the Malaysia Airline flights MH370 became the world's greatest aviation mystery when it disappeared without a trace flying from Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia to Beijing, China in March 2014. So these are some of the traffic or accidents figure. 13 million total driver's license issued, 7,463,393 total motor vehicles registered, 270,000 kilometer total length of roads nationwide, 132,089 violators of the Seatbelt Use Act. 79% road crash fatalities caused by the driver error, 11% road crash fatalities caused by defective vehicles, 10% road crash fatalities caused by dangerous road conditions and ill-maintained roads, 16% road crashes caused by trucks in the first half of 2013, 12% road crashes caused by trucks in 2012, and 7.5% of the road users' tax collected annually that will be allotted for road safety measures. Now let's move forward to the third one, accidents due to activities. There are various activities in connection with the tourism industry that are susceptible to give harm and danger not only to the employees but as well as to the tourists and various stakeholders. So these are some of the accidents that could be confronted while enjoying tourism-related activities. Number one is pool accidents. As you can see, the boy slipped accidentally in the wet floor area of the pool. The second one is animal bite or attack. As you can see, the girl who is enjoying taking a selfie of the animal suddenly attacked by the animal itself. The third one is drowning. As you can see, the little boy who is lack of guidance by the older people was drowned in the deep area of the pool. And the fourth one is electrocution, which usually occur in the hotel room or reservation or reception area of the hotel. And now, let's move to the next reporter.
Hi, I am Nina and I will talk about natural causes and disasters, deliberate attack from an adversary, and events of uncertain or unpredictable root cause. First, we will talk about natural causes and disasters. It may be categorized into three broad groups: caused by movements of the earth, disasters related to weather, and floods, mudslides, landslides, and famine. The movements of the earth may include earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and tsunamis. Risk managers could hardly predict the occurrences of this phenomenon. The only thing that they can do is to take necessary measures to lessen the damage to property and loss of life after the event. Disasters related to weather include hurricanes, tornadoes, El Nino, La Nina, extreme heat, and freezing water. There is no way to stop these occurrences as the weather system develops. Risk managers can only do something to lessen the effect of these natural occurrences, but they cannot get rid of it. Floods, mudslides, landslides, and famine are considered as magnitudes of the occurrences of the extreme weather events, These are the results of unforeseen conditions. Next, we will talk about the deliberate attack from an adversary. In an article of Sinai, he expressed his belief on the vital role of tourism in the economy of the nation as evidenced by the revenue of the government, employment, and national income. He said that by attacking the industry, economic recession and employment may be at stake. He concluded that terrorist groups perceive hotels, restaurants, and tourist resorts as significant targets for attack. He cited the incident of June 26, 2015, wherein an Islamic terrorist carried out mass shooting, killing 30 British tourists at Port El Kantawi. Further, he also claimed the impact of the terrorism in Tunisia, which caused the forced shutdown of 70 hotels and a decline of an estimated 80% foreign tourism. Sinai said in his article that in response to such terrorist threats, the hotel industry around the world has beefed up its security departments, implementing a range of security measures to protect guests at their properties, ranging from armed guards to concrete barriers and metal detectors. Terrorism, according to Albo, has become one of the more and more active and threatening calamities that affect the international community. He concluded that tourists avoid the tourist areas where terrorist events have occurred, their confidence in their respective destination being very hard to recover. The attacks has resulted in the strengthening of security sectors in the states affected, review of domestic boarding policy, and the strict passengers control, even if the purpose of travel is tourism. And lastly, I will talk about the events of uncertain or unpredictable root cause. The strategies to manage risk typically include transferring risk to another party, avoiding the risk, reducing the adverse effect or probability of the risk, or even accepting some or all of the potential or actual consequences of a particular risk. Certain aspects of many of the risk management standards have come under criticism for having no measurable improvement on risk, whether the confidence in estimates and decisions seem to increase. There are two types of events in risk management: the negative events or the risks, and the positive events or the opportunities. The context of the event is a determinant of appropriate risk management technique, and that would be all for my part.
Hi, I'm Ruth and I'm here to discuss about the strategies to manage threats. So first is to avoid threat. Avoidance eliminates the risk by removing the cause. Second is reduction of the adverse effect or probability of the threat. Reducing the risk lets you continue with the activity filled with expenses in place to make it less dangerous. Third is transfer of all the part of the threat to another party, meaning the risk is shifted to a third party. Fourth is the last one, is to retain some or all of the potential or actual consequences of a particular threat and the opposites for opportunities, like uncertain future states with benefits. The advantage of accepting a risk is pretty clear. There's no cost and it frees up resources on more serious risks. Next is the method to how to implement the strategies to manage uncertainties. The different strategies of managing uncertainties can be dealt with using the following elements in order. So first is the threat identification of characterization. Identifying threats allows your organization to take preemptive actions. Second is assessment of the vulnerability of critical events to specific threats. Determine how an adversary could carry out a specific kind of attack against a specific asset or a group of assets. Next is risk determination. Assess the threat and vulnerabilities to consider the likelihood that's known as threat sources. Fourth is identification of the techniques to reduce those risks, namely interviews, brainstorming, checklists, assumptions analysis, cause and effect, and normal group discussions. Last one is prioritization of the measures necessary to close critical gaps in measurements. So next is risk management principles. By implementing a risk management plan and considering the various potential risks or events before they occur, an organization can save money and protect their future. So here are the list of risk management principles. So the following are some of the risk management principles initiated by the International Organization for Standardization. First is risk management should create a value wherein the resources expended to mitigate risk should be less than the consequences of inactions. Next is it should be an integral part of the organizational process, become part of the decision making. The fourth one is that it should be explicitly address uncertainty and assumptions. Fifth is it should be placed in a systematic and structured processes. The best available information should be the basis of risk management. Seventh is the risk management should be tailorable. Next is it should be tailorable. 9 is it should be transparent and inclusive. 10 is the dynamism, interactivity, and responsiveness to change must be evident on the risk management. 11 is risk management should be capable of continual improvement and enhancement. Lastly, there is a need for a continuous and periodic reassured of the risk management. So lastly, steps on risk management process as per ISO 31000. ISO 31000 is a family of standards relating to risk management for management codified by the International Organization for Standardization. They provide principles and generic guidelines on managing risk faced by organizations. Example of these are context established, identification of the potential risk assessment, creation of risk options, identification of potential risk management solutions, and make a risk management plan. Lastly, the context establishment. Establishing the context and risk management involves the following. Letter A, risk identification in a selected domain of interest. Letter B, planning the rest of the whole risk management process. Letter B is plotting out the following: scope risk management, identify the objectives of the stakeholders. Lastly, basis of the risk evaluation and constraints. Letter D is the framing of risk management activity and the agenda for identification. Letter E is analysis of risk involved in the process. Lastly, giving of a solution of risk using available technological, human, and organizational resources.
Good day, I am Diane, and I am going to tackle about the identification of the potential risk. List identification is the process of listing potential project lists and their characteristics. Good managers must have the ability to anticipate what will emerge from the current undertaking they have been engaged in. It may begin with identification of the source, whether from the competitors or with the issue itself. The source of risk may be classified as internal or external. Internal risks are from the inside of the organization and occur during regular service. Often, internal risks are predictable and can be avoided or mitigated. External risks come from beyond or outside the company and outside the reach of the team. It is tend to be predictable only in perspective, so efforts need to be concentrated on identification and responses. The following factors could be considered as determinants in choosing a method of identifying risk: objectives, scenario and taxonomy-based risk identification, common risk checking, and risk charting. Objective-based risk identification. So this is the organization's mission, vision, and objectives demonstrate where the organization should be at a specific point in time. It is a common understanding that it is not easy to know this, as there are risks that may obstruct them as they go along the way. Any happenings that may bar them in achieving those may be regarded as risk necessitates of action on the part of management. Scenario-based risk identification. Different scenarios must be considered in the determination of applicable risk management techniques. Scenarios are the alternatives of the objectives or an analysis of the interaction of forces. It encourages managers to envision plausible future states of the world and consider how to take advantage of opportunities and avoid potential threats. Taxonomy-based risk identification. It is the breakdown of possible risk resources. It is a comprehensive, common, and stable set of risk categories that is used within an organization. By providing a comprehensive set of risk categories, it encourages those involved in risk identification to consider all types of risks that could affect the organization's objectives. The proponents found out that larger organizations tend to employ more risk management strategies than the smaller organizations do. Common risk checking. Another method to identify risk in any organization is the common risk checking, which lists the known risk available. Lists with identified threats are available in many industries. In order to apply a specific case, each risk in the list may be reviewed.
Hi, I'm Kate. To further discuss about common risk. The concept of risk was in opposition in the quality and controllability of food, which emerged as essential strategies to cope with food risk. The quality was linked to freshness and local origin, whereas controllability reflected a direct, for example, checking labels, having a relationship with the vendors, cultivating one's vegetable garden, or indirect. Then another example is control guarantee provided by suppliers and the government. It means it to check the safety and quality of the food. Although people seem quite informed about food risk, a shared sense of impotence about one's protection prevailed together with a fatalistic sense of incomplete control over risk. The result identified food concerns for consumers living in this specific territory and might represent a starting point for public health authorities to increase compliance with responsible behaviors. For risk mitigation, increase compliance with responsible for risk mitigation, and to define successful food policies for this area. Risk charting, vulnerability and exposures. This method is the combination of all the approaches or techniques discussed above, which enumerates the resources at risk, threats to those resources, modifying factors which may increase or decrease the risk, and consequences it wishes to avoid. With this method, one can map out the risks to determine which one is to be prioritized. The most critical one should put an utmost vigilance into managing this. Risk assessment. Risk assessment comes next after the risk have been pointed out. It is a stage wherein the severity of the impact of the said risk is being weighed to make the most intelligent decisions for the full implementation of the risk management plan. According to RFC 4949, risk assessment is the determination of a quantitative or qualitative estimate of risk related to a clear situation and recognizes threat, also called hazard. There are two components for quantitative risk assessment. First is the magnitude of potential loss. The second is the probability of the occurrence of the risk. Magnitude of the potential loss are risk assessment parameters that determine the level of impact should a loss due to an unfortunate event occurs. Then for The next one is probability of occurrence uses a rating and value scale ranging from not present to almost certain to certain. Pertinent to risk assessment is the acceptable risk, which is tolerable because the countermeasure. So it means cost or difficulty for the associated vulnerability exceeds the expectation of loss. In the study conducted by Leon and Popov, they said that risk assessment alone does not suffice as the risk communication is required to reduce uncertainty and manage operational risk. Noteworthy of discussion in this book is the risk assessment of Melatiz and Campbell that could contribute to the environmental justice diversification by using it to frame ecotourism-related solid waste management problems. So, from the word ecotourism is a service industry portrayed as benevolent, providing benefits, and benign, reducing negative impacts. Melatiz and Campbell had applied the following characteristics shared by ecotourism-based communities in the global south and communities struggling with more conventional environmental justice conflicts to the solid waste crisis in Tortuguera, Costa Rica, a renowned ecotourism destination. So, despite their general absences from the environmental justice literature, service industries such as tourism and hospitality can create environment injustice that disproportionately impact certain types of communities.
So, good day everyone. I am Marie and I'm here to discuss about the risk option, risk treatments, and risk avoidance. Risk options. The following are some of the options to mitigate risks. First, project a novel business procedure with sufficient built-in risk control and containment measures from the start. Second, conduct a periodic reassessment of the risks that are acceptable in ongoing processes as a regular feature of a business operation and modify mitigations measures. Third, transfer or hand over risk to an external agency like an insurance company. Fourth, avoid risk altogether. Example given by closing down a particular high-risk business area. Potential risk treatments. The techniques in managing risk may be categorized into the following. First, avoidance. Eliminate, withdraw from, or not become involved. You can choose not to take the risk through avoiding those actions that will lead to risk. Second, reduction. Optimize and mitigate. You can take mitigation actions that can reduce possible risk. Third, sharing, transfer, outsource. You can transfer all or part of the risk to a third party. The two main types of sharing are insurance and outsourcing. Fourth, retention, accept and budget. Risk retention is also known as risk acceptance. Is choosing to face the risk. In general, it is impossible to profit in a business or enjoy a lifestyle without even taking the risk. For a better understanding of concept of risk avoidance, the authors opted to illustrate it through various literatures and studies. Simplicio et al. 2007 have conducted a study about allergen involved a sensation and allergic disease in hotels in Uberlândia, Midwestern Brazil. They have concluded that the mites and pets are the sources of indoor allergens. Thus, hotels should also be included for planning indoor allergen avoidance as part of a global strategy, especially with patients that have respiratory allergies. Abebo P. Foriwa, T. Dramola B.A. and Swainson M. 2016 have conducted a study about the compliance of individual countries in the requirements of food laws as a form of risk avoidance, concluding the importance of the development of food hygiene training programs towards mandatory certification at different levels of responsibility for the industry is required to help curb the identified challenges. Money and Crotts 2016 showed that the consumers from national cultures characterized by high levels of uncertainty avoidance use information sources that related to the channel. Example given, travel agent. Instead of personal destination marketing related or mass media sources, they also more frequently purchase pre-packaged tours, travel in larger groups, and stay on average a shorter time and visit fewer numbers of destinations.
Risk management plan. So the mitigation of risk is dependent on the countermeasures by the management, which must be planned ahead of time. There must be a corresponding plan for every adverse occurrences or event. On the year 2015, the COSO stated that the risk management plan evaluates identified risk and outlines mitigation sources. She further stated that the need for periodical updates and expansion in the entire cycle of the project as the project becomes more complex and more defined. She also suggested that the inclusion of the following in the information or formulation of the matrix is to prioritize risk. It must be noted that the risk plan for smaller projects can be as simple as a risk management matrix, while complex projects require more thorough risk analysis and planning. Here are some of the costly statements. Risk and consequences. It usually identifies the risk associated with the project and the probability that it could affect the schedule, the resourcing, or the budget. Probability. This could be a percentage or a number. 3. Impact. The determination of the impact or the variant effect to the risk of the business is necessary as well as the matrix. 4. Priority. The column would merely state which among the identified risks should be attended first because of its severity of effect or impact. And lastly, number 5 is the mitigation response. This is the overview of the mitigation steps for the reduction or elimination of the risk. So the risk treatment plan should be necessarily followed the completion of the risk assessment phase as per ISO and IEC. The risk treatment plan documents the handling of the identified risk. Implementation. The challenge indeed of effective risk management is on the actual implementation of the plan. There are cases that people involved in the preparations can no longer execute what was planned ahead of time. There is a distinction between the simulation exercises involving earthquakes and the actual happening of the event. Different factors must be considered like the fear for life and of course property. The thing is, if the planned action is well executed, we can say that the whole process is successful. However, if there are 180 degrees of deviation of what is planned, we can say that the whole process is a failure. Another thing to consider during the implementation of the risk management process is the ability of the risk manager to ascertain the necessary insurance for the given situation. There must be proper accounting and evident good faith on the part of the insured to make that the insurance company involved would give you the necessary assistance based on the insurance coverage. Risks are supposedly anticipated, hence proper insurance system must have been availed of before the occurrence of the unexpected event. Lastly is the review and evaluation of the plan. One can never perfect the initial risk management plan. Expect the glitches and be open to modification and changes of plan. Consider the practice, experience, and the actual loss of results when you do your modifications. An updated periodic management plan is needed because of the following reasons. 1. Determination of the applicability and effectiveness of the previous security controls. 2.
Understand the possible changes in risk level and business environment. That's all for risk management plan, and this is once again Rika Vian. Thank you so much for listening. The overall chapter conclusions. Risk is staple in all types of businesses, especially in tourism and hospitality industry. Risk and hazard is different as risk is an effect of hazard and hazard pertains to any type of potential damages. Natural disasters are unpredictable and impossible to get rid of, but risk managers can do something to lessen the effects of these natural occurrences. The tourism industry has a vital role in the economy and economic recession, and employment could be at stake if the industry is attacked by terrorists. And lastly, identification of risk helps organizations to build strategies before they occur to mitigate adverse incidents. So those were some of the chapter conclusions.